Walls of fear, the deadly science of ancient fortresses. Soundscape fades in, distant war drums, echoes of chisels striking stone, wind sweeping across desert ruins. Narrator calm, deep tone. Before the age of knights and kings, there were walls. Walls that carved empires into the earth. From the burning deserts of Babylon to the cliffs of Masada, humanity's first engineers built fortresses that defied time, invaders, and even nature itself. They were not monuments of peace, but machines of survival. Every brick placed with purpose. Every passage, a trap. Every tower, a weapon made of stone. In a world without gunpowder, steel, or modern science, defense was an art, and architecture was the battlefield. These fortresses weren't just walls of stone. They were living systems, balancing weight, pressure, and geometry in ways that foreshadowed the castles of the Middle Ages. Look closer, and you'll see the brilliance hidden in their design. Angled bastions that deflected missiles, labyrinthine gates that slowed invaders, and secret corridors carved for retreat and counterattack. Each fortress told the same story of ingenuity, born from fear, and of civilizations that refused to fall. Today, their ruins whisper a question through the dust and silence. How did ancient builders with nothing but muscle, math, and imagination create structures so advanced they still stand thousands of years later? I'm Hostname, and this is Timeless Engineering. Join us as we uncover the secret engineering of ancient fortresses, the forgotten machines of stone that built the world's first empires. Narrator, steady, informative tone. Before medieval castles crowned the hills of Europe, the world had already mastered the art of fortification. Long before knights charged into battle, civilizations from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean were locked in a race to build the unbreakable wall. When you look at the ancient world, one truth stands above all. Power was measured not by wealth, but by how well you could defend it. From the riverbanks of the Tigris to the mountains of Anatolia, empires rose and fell behind stone and fire. The Babylonians built massive ramparts of glazed brick, glowing blue under the desert sun. The Greeks crowned their cities with acropolises, sacred fortresses in the clouds. The Romans, ever the engineers, laced their frontiers with forts so precise that their outlines can still be traced from the sky today. And to the east, the Byzantines perfected defense into an art with triple walls, underground cisterns, and gates that could hold back entire armies for centuries. But these were not just monuments of power. Each fortress was a living organism designed to channel human movement, to slow invaders, to multiply the strength of the few who defended it. Every turn in a hallway, every step in a staircase, was planned with mathematical precision and tactical foresight. Music swells slightly low, drums and choirs. The idea of a fortress was universal. In Persia, hilltop citadels rose like stone crowns. In China, early ramparts stretched beyond the horizon. In the Levant, cliffside strongholds such as Masada became symbols of resistance itself. And though each civilization spoke a different language, they all understood one equation: height plus geometry equals survival. The fortress was more than protection. It was a message. To enemies you shall not pass. To the people, you are safe within these walls. This was the world before castles. A world where architecture was strategy, and where every stone carried both purpose and pride. Narrator, slower, more dramatic. These ancient fortresses became the ancestors of every medieval stronghold that followed. The blueprint of human endurance, carved in rock. Music fades, replaced by the distant call of a horn. Next, we'll uncover the first layer of their genius, how location itself became the strongest weapon of all. Narrator, focused, strategic tone. Every great fortress begins not with stone, but with the ground beneath it. Before the first block was laid, ancient engineers searched for the perfect terrain, the place where nature itself could be turned into a wall. To build high was to survive. Elevation gave the defenders three priceless advantages: visibility, time, and control. From the cliffs of Masada, where the Judean rebels held off Rome's legions, to the towering Acropolis of Athens, the landscape became part of the defense itself. A single path, a narrow ridge, or a sheer cliff could do what 100 soldiers could not stop an army dead in its tracks. Soft drumbeat underscores the next lines. Ancient builders understood geometry long before they could write it down. They shaped the earth like engineers, carving slopes, terraces, and platforms to absorb shock and deflect attack. A fortress on a hill didn't just see farther, it forced enemies to climb into exhaustion and chaos. For every meter gained, the attacker lost speed, coordination, and strength. In the deserts of Mesopotamia, walls rose on artificial mounds called tells, layers of civilization built atop one another. These elevated strongholds were not accidents of time, but deliberate engineering decisions. Height meant dominance, and dominance meant survival. Some fortresses went even further, merging fully with the land. At Sacsayhuaman in the Andes, Inca masons fit massive stones along natural ridges, their curves mirroring the mountain's flow. In Anatolia, Hittite walls followed the contour of the hills like serpents of limestone and clay. To attack them was to fight both man and nature at once. Music swells rhythmic and tense. This marriage of terrain and architecture was the first form of defensive engineering. The fortress was not simply placed on the earth, it was grown from it. Narrator, calm, reflective. Before the age of gunpowder, before the age of steel, the ground itself was the engineer's greatest weapon. Next, we'll see how these elevated citadels turned raw stone and earth into walls of impossible strength. The true science behind the ancient wall. Narrator, precise, steady tone. Once the site was chosen, the engineers of the ancient world began their masterpiece. A wall that would turn a mountain into a machine. Walls were not simply barriers. They were systems, layers of stone, clay, timber, and geometry woven into one living defense. The earliest fortresses of Mesopotamia used sun-baked bricks bound by bitumen, a natural tar that sealed the gaps and resisted water. In Egypt and Persia, masons favored limestone and mud brick cores wrapped in polished stone. But by the time of Babylon, wall building had become a science. The city's outer rampart was more than 20 meters thick, 2 parallel walls filled with rubble and gravel in between, a primitive form of shock absorption that dissipated the energy of battering rams. At intervals stood towers, spaced at regular geometry, allowing defenders to fire sideways along the wall's face, an early version of flanking fire, centuries before the term existed. Sound cue, chains clanking, gates creaking open. Yet the weakest point of any fortress was always its gate. To close that vulnerability, the ancients designed gates not as openings but as traps. At Babylon's Ishtar Gate, attackers faced a narrow, bending corridor that forced them to slow down and expose their flanks. Above them, hidden chambers allowed archers to fire through slits and drop stones or boiling liquids. The deeper they went, the narrower the space became, a funnel designed to turn numbers into chaos. Elsewhere, engineers added angled entries that zigzagged between towers. Every turn broke the momentum of cavalry and lined up attackers perfectly for enfilading fire. To breach a gate was to walk willingly into an ambush. Music builds metallic rhythm, low drones. But the genius of these fortifications wasn't just brute thickness, it was mathematical form. Walls leaned outward in gentle slopes, called battered walls, redirecting the force of impact down and away. This same angle made scaling nearly impossible. Ladders slipped, siege towers tilted. Corners were rounded instead of square, dispersing stress like the curve of a modern bridge arch. In Anatolia, the Hittites built cyclopean walls, immense blocks fitted without mortar, their own weight locking them together. At Mycenae, engineers crowned their gate with a triangular void, the relieving triangle, a brilliant design that transferred pressure away from the lintel, allowing the gate to bear enormous weight. It was pure structural logic, discovered more than 1,000 years before Rome. Sound lowers, voice slows. Each civilization refined the formula: strength through geometry, durability through material, deception through design. Narrator, quietly powerful. To breach such walls, brute force was never enough. You had to understand them, to think like the builders themselves. In the next chapter, we'll see how those same minds transformed walls into weapons, turning fortresses from silent stone into machines of destruction. Narrator energized, commanding tone. A fortress was never passive. It wasn't built only to withstand attack. It was designed to fight back. When the enemy gathered beyond the walls, the fortress itself awakened a machine of moving parts, ready to kill. From high towers and battlements, defenders commanded the air, loosing arrows through narrow slits called embrasures, each slit angled to widen inward, giving archers maximum vision while keeping their bodies hidden behind stone. Through the shadows of upper chambers came the thunder of engines, ballistae, torsion catapults, and stone throwers armed with twisted sinew and bronze arms. Each weapon was positioned for geometry, not guesswork, aligned to the arcs of enemy approach, its range calculated through repetition, intuition, and mathematics long before calculus had a name. Sound cue, ropes twisting, wood creaking, a massive thud. These machines hurled stones, the weight of men, splintering siege towers, and scattering formations. They fired not randomly but rhythmically, turning the wall into an orchestra of destruction. Yet not all defenses shouted. Some whispered. Hidden within walls were vertical shafts, murder holes, disguised above gateways and corridors. Through them poured rocks, arrows, and boiling oil. The heat alone could blind, and the shock of a single stone from above could crush armor like paper. Defensive corridors twisted like mazes, with false doors leading nowhere and chambers that trapped invaders in sudden dead ends. Every corner could hide death, and every stairway was built to favor the right-handed defender, forcing the attacker to swing uphill, his sword arm pressed to the inner wall. Music intensifies war drums and chanting. In the east, Assyrian fortresses mounted oil channels along parapets, liquid fire that poured down like molten rain. Greek engineers filled clay pots with resin and pitch, hurling them as primitive incendiaries, the first sparks of what would become Greek fire, the terror of the Byzantine world. Even silence was a weapon. Echoing tunnels beneath the walls were carved not for escape, but for sound. Engineers could hear miners digging beneath the fortress long before collapse. A primitive form of acoustic detection, an early warning system built from stone. Sound drops slow heartbeat rhythm. Every fortress was a mind, a designer's prediction of chaos. Walls, gates, and traps formed an equation where geometry met brutality. Narrator, steady, reflective. When you stood atop those battlements, you weren't merely defending land. You were commanding an ancient machine, one powered by gravity, leverage, and fear. Music rises, hopeful. But the genius of ancient defense did not end in battle. At the heart of every stronghold stood something far more enduring. The Citadel, the sanctuary of both life and power. Narrator, calm, measured tone. Every fortress had a heart, a final sanctuary that would stand when every wall had fallen. The Citadel. It was more than a building. It was a philosophy in stone, the belief that order could survive chaos. Deep within the outer defenses, behind gates and battlements, rose the Citadel, a central stronghold built to be both palace and bunker, a place where the ruler, the soldiers, and the last hope of a civilization could endure. Soft drum beats return, slower, heavier. The Citadel's walls were the thickest of all, sometimes 10 meters of layered stone and earth, a fortress within a fortress. Its entrances were narrow, often reached by spiraling ramps that forced invaders to expose their flanks. Each turn was a calculated delay, a mathematical pause in the rhythm of attack. Inside, the architecture was a study in function and faith. Storage rooms lined the lower levels, packed with grain, oil, and water to outlast sieges. Above them, armories and barracks formed a compact ecosystem of defense, a city compressed into stone. And at the center of it all stood the keep, a tower of command and symbol of authority. From the citadel of Byblos to the inner fortress of Mycenae, engineers used redundancy as their shield. If one wall fell, another stood behind it. If a gate was breached, a second corridor awaited, angled, defended, merciless. It was not paranoia. It was design logic. Ambient music grows with echoes of chant and metal. Beneath many citadels ran networks of underground tunnels, the hidden veins of the fortress. Some led to secret wells, ensuring fresh water even when siege cut the surface dry. Others served as postern gates, narrow escape routes used for messengers or counterattacks under the cover of darkness. To those who defended them, these paths were hope. To those who attacked, they were mystery. The citadel was a world unto itself, a balance of life and war. Within its courtyards, blacksmiths forged weapons beside temples of worship. Priests and soldiers shared walls because faith and steel were both needed to hold the line. At night, torches lined the ramparts like a necklace of fire. From the highest tower, the commander could see beyond the outer walls. Not just the enemy's campfires, but the very land he swore to protect. Music softens reflective strings. This fusion of human will and architectural precision made the Citadel the greatest expression of ancient engineering. Every arch, every corridor, every hidden chamber was a reminder. Civilization is fragile, but design can make it endure. Narrator softly, with reverence. To those who built them, the Citadel was not just a place of safety. It was the heartbeat of a people, the last bastion of their culture, their faith, and their hope. Fade to silence, then a single drumbeat. But even the strongest hearts eventually face a new enemy. In the next chapter, the walls will meet their greatest foe, the age of gunpowder. For thousands of years, walls had ruled the world. They divided kingdoms, protected cities, and turned the will of kings into stone. But no wall, no matter how thick, could withstand the thunder that came next. Cue deep, echoing cannon blast. The age of gunpowder had arrived. When the first cannons roared across medieval battlefields, centuries of engineering were undone in a single day. The perfect slope of the battered wall, once a defense against rams and arrows, became a weakness. Stone shattered under repeated fire, and the proud towers that once touched the clouds were torn apart from below. By the 15th century, a new kind of warfare had reshaped the map. Fortresses that had once stood unconquered for centuries, Constantinople, Rhodes, Kaffa, fell beneath the booming rhythm of artillery. The old masters of stone faced a weapon their geometry could not deflect. But engineers did not surrender. They adapted. Across Europe, new fortifications emerged lower, wider, and angular. These were the bastion forts of the Renaissance. Their walls built not to rise above the enemy, but to absorb his fire. Earthen ramparts replaced towers. Geometry evolved again, triangles and stars replacing circles and curves. War had changed, but the principles of balance, leverage, and terrain endured. Music softened strings and slow choir. The fortress, as a war machine, slowly faded. Kings and emperors traded bastions for palaces. Stone became art instead of armor. What was once built for survival was now built for beauty. Yet, the legacy remained. Every modern bunker, every mountain base, every concrete wall that still protects the living, all trace their lineage back to those ancient citadels. Narrator, quiet, reverent. Though gunpowder broke the walls, it could not erase the idea behind them, that design, not strength alone, is what keeps civilizations alive. Music fades into distant echoes of wind over ruins, and even today, among the shattered stones of forgotten strongholds, the silence speaks, a whisper from the builders who once defied the impossible. Narrator quiet, reflective tone. The fortress was never just a wall. It was a story written in stone, told through centuries of war, hope, and endurance. Every block carried a memory, of hands that built, of hearts that defended, of empires that believed they could last forever. Even in ruin, their geometry remains perfect, silent, and unbroken. Angles that still align with the sun, arches that still hold against the pull of gravity, designs that still whisper the same truth. That engineering is not about domination. It is about survival. It is how civilizations speak across time, how human ingenuity refuses to die. Even when the empires that built it have long turned to dust, music rises, slow strings, and deep choir. The ancient fortress may have fallen to cannon fire, but the ideas it carried, balance, precision, resilience, live on. In every modern structure we build today, from skyscrapers that defy wind to underground bunkers that withstand impact, the legacy of those first walls still shapes our world. Narrator, softly, final. When you stand before the ruins of a forgotten citadel, you are not looking at the past. You are looking at the blueprint of humanity itself. I'm Hostname, and this is Timeless Engineering, where history meets design, and every stone tells a story. Music swells, then fades into the sound of wind and distant echoes of ancient drums.